What's up, Applied English? So, a pretty short little assignment video that I want you guys to watch in order to be ready to start reading tomorrow as a class as we move into a new unit. This is just a little introduction to the person, the life, the work of Booker T. Washington. Maybe some of you are familiar with him, maybe some of you are not. We're looking about, 100, 130 years in the past or so. So it's very possible some of you studied his life in grade school, maybe others have not. We're all going to get on the same page today. The word I use to describe Booker T. Washington is iconic. Definitely someone who really stands out in especially in African American history. We'll learn why as we start today. We're also going to be reading his autobiography. So it's a pretty short actual text to read. He did not cover his entire life, so to speak, but he does have quite a bit to write about from his rise from slavery up into prominence as an adult. Let's learn about him a little bit. So the T stands for Taliaferro. We'll learn a little bit about the history of that name as we read his autobiography, but his full name was Booker Taliaferro Washington. The title of the autobiography we'll be reading is Up from Slavery. So he was born into slavery in Halesford, Virginia. Booker T. Washington was born towards the tail end of slavery in the United States. So he has the unique perspective of knowing what it was like in slavery, outside of slavery, and then long after slavery into his old age. He was an African-American educator, author, and advisor to the President of the United States. That's what POTUS stands for. Obviously, in adulthood, as a child, he was, once again, in slavery. He did become one of the foremost African-American leaders of the late 19th century. So late 1800s into the early 1900s. First couple of years there was when he was very, very, very prominent. His big theme that we'll see over and over again in the text is education. So while a lot of people were talking about reaching for equality right after slavery had ended, Booker T. Washington went a different route, and he emphasized education. Really getting blacks, and I'm using the term black here because he uses the term black quite a bit in his autobiography itself, but his big emphasis was black education. He said, let's hit the brakes on equality for a moment here. Let's get educated first, and then we'll work our way towards equality. So he was not fully anti-equality. He just definitely thought that the time was right for education first. As such, his biggest achievement and what he devoted most of his life's work to was founding the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. We would now know that nowadays as Tuskegee University. So it started off small, and it grew into a massive school that we know it as today. He gained a lot of attention after publication of his autobiography. He published it during his lifetime, titled Up from Slavery. That's what we'll be reading over these next few weeks here. Reading, discussing, studying, I should say. There's a picture of him. This is one of two really iconic photos we'll see in this presentation here. Once again, we see a little caption there, educator, reformer, most influential black leader of his time. We do see that he was born in 1856. Again, that is, what, about 10-ish years? I'm really bad with my history there. It's somewhere between 5 and 10 years before the ending of slavery. And you'll notice there that he died in 1915. So we did see the turn of the century, really close to industrialization, the start of World War I, and so on. A couple of his core beliefs. He believed in this philosophy of self-help. I've underlined a few terms that I want to emphasize today. His big thing for blacks, as he writes in his text, was that no one's going to help them now that slavery is over. No one's going to help them to figure things out on their own. So his big thing was, how do I get African Americans, how do I get blacks to really lift themselves up? And we see that later on in the slide too. How do we lift ourselves up as he lifted himself out of slavery into education, into success? One of his most controversial standpoints is that he basically said that blacks should accept discrimination for the time being. He was kind of a realist in the sense that he knew that things were not going to be easy after slavery. His big focus, again, was education. How do we lift ourselves up? How do we work hard, work through the discrimination of the time, so that we can better battle for equality later, was his mentality. We see material gains there too. He was big on building up wealth as well. Again, coming out of slavery, most African Americans had nothing except the clothes on their backs at the time, and so his big thing was building up success, building up wealth as well, in order to continue surviving. His big thing for education, too, was learning trades. So crafts, industrial farming skills, again, becoming self-sufficient, taking care of themselves, building communities was a big thing that he believed in. He was also big on virtues, things like patience, thrift, even more than that, things like hygiene, cleanliness, timeliness, just a lot of things that aren't necessarily teachable skills are big beliefs of Booker T. Washington. By the way, that's another iconic photo of him as well, just sitting at his desk at Tuskegee. Once again, his belief was to win the respect of whites, lead to African Americans being fully accepted, really integrating into all parts of society. He believed that it began with education, not necessarily beginning with politics, as other people were arguing at the time. The last thing we'll focus on, there's a chapter of the autobiography devoted to this as well. It says Atlanta Compromise speech. Probably the most famous thing that he wrote, most famous thing that he spoke as well. It was a speech that he delivered to a white audience at the Cotton States and International Exposition. That sounds like kind of a boring event, but imagine that being kind of like the World's Fair at the time. So a really big event, a really big platform for him to speak. His basic message was that Southern blacks had reached a high point. So they're free from slavery, they're building communities, they're starting farms and all those things. And his belief is that they should be content with what's been given to them. So count their blessings, considering the hardships they were still facing racial hatred, tensions, racism, still immense poverty in the area, and so on. But he did want to highlight the high points of education, of skill growth, of gains, of community being built, to show the North that racial progress was occurring. So what he was trying to do there was trying to gain more support from northern states, from northern whites, to get them to invest more deeply into what's going on in the South. There were mixed reactions, mixed feelings about his speech. There were other African-American leaders who opposed him in this. The big argument was with him and W.E.B. Du Bois. He's another great thinker, great writer of his time. Du Bois was definitely more on the political side of things. Definitely believed that blacks should be really striving, really battling for equality, really battling for political offices, for positions like that. Du Bois made the argument from time to time that blacks should try to leave the Americas, head back to Africa, back to prominence there, that there wasn't much for African Americans in the United States if they couldn't get equality, and so on. Du Bois' big argument was that this speech, he believed that it contradicted all their work and effort to gain political prominence. He believed that Booker T was kind of selling out to the white audience and making African Americans look weak. Again, we can kind of decide that for ourselves as we're reading this autobiography as well. There might be things that we heavily agree with Booker T on. There might be some things that we disagree with him on, and that's fine. This speech became known later on as the Atlanta Compromise. A lot of people saw this speech kind of as an unspoken agreement to be very accommodating to whites. Again, Booker T was a bigger believer that in collaboration between blacks and whites in order to lift up African Americans. Others saw this as kind of selling out to the white audience. And again, we can decide on that as we are reading this text, as we discuss it over these next few weeks. That's all I got for you guys. So again, I do want you to be ready to start reading tomorrow. We'll kind of see how Booker T. Washington's life played out, starting from his upbringing in slavery in chapter 1. I'm excited to read it with you guys. Later.